Accordingly, all those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. There being no dissenting voice, I declare the motion carried.
In this bill, the preamble of the bill actually states that that cisgender or male and female as a nature and scriptures would say, and that heterosexuality and someone who believes these are normative or best is a myth. And so essentially what they do with that bill is say the scriptures are a myth, and those who hold to them are holding to myths and fables, which is really quite astounding.
That's what happened to me when I was in university. I asked one of my Christian friends for the phone number of a local Christian counselor to help me reduce my non-heterosexual attractions and behavior. And there were some good lessons I learned from that I still put in practice today as a celibate man. That person who gave me that phone number now could go to jail for 2 years.
The only people engaged in conversion therapy are the gender clinics. Not the pastors, not me, not anybody else, because they are the ones that are coercing medical transitioning. They are the ones that are guilty. And I agree, it should be against the law.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News, and today I am very fortunate to be joined by Walt Heyer. Walt lived as a man for the first 42 years of his life, and as he will share, at the age of 42, because of some elements and factors of his history, he transitioned and lived as a woman for 8 years. He has since that time detransitioned, he's married, and he counsels people who are struggling with generalized dysphoria. Now, the type of counseling that he offers based on his personal life story would technically, to the best of my understanding, be illegal here in Canada. And that's extremely troubling. We live in a society that is all about informed consent. And when we strip people like Walt, who have lived through this, of their capacity to share their story, we simply lose out. We need a plurality of voices sharing their opinions so that people can make informed decisions, not simply a one-track narrative that everyone has to adhere to. For more on this, I'm joined by Walt.
Well, my story actually starts in 1944. So most of the people listening probably, can't even conceive of anybody being that old. But, I'm 81 years old. So I've been dealing with this for over 77 years. I started out as a 4-year-old who was cross-dressing, had this cross-dressing issue, and then went through the complete surgical procedure at age 42, and then detransitioned at age 50, and then began studying psychology. And then a few years later, got married. I've been married now for almost 25 years. So that just gives you kind of a quick span. But what I learned as a child was that cross-dressing actually causes it causes you to not like who you are. In other words, when you begin to do this cross-dressing and then you're affirmed, like my grandmother was affirming me, she made me a purple dress. And so what happened at that particular point was she was sort of coercing me into not liking who I was because she was affirming me as a girl in the purple dress she made for me. Now, after all these years and looking back, at the time I couldn't see this, but now I see it as emotional, psychological child abuse. And because anytime you begin to affirm somebody, in a different identity in terms of just wearing clothing, which that's all it was. She put me in a dress and said how cute I looked, how wonderful I looked. Well, she was really complimenting herself on the dress she made, but it was doing damage to me. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, after cross-dressing with her secretly without my parents knowing for over 2.5 years, the seed of confusion, of dysphoria, began to build up in my head, my psyche, my feelings. And I didn't know anything. And there were no words back in the 40s, transgender, gender dysphoria, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So everything kind of came later. I learned about Christine Jorgensen, who was somebody who made headlines here in the U.S., who was one of the first ones they claimed went through the surgery and lived in California, became sort of a sensation, you might say. When I saw that story, I thought, well, that must be me. That was my way that I began to identify toward transgenderism, although they called Christine Jorgensen a transsexual. And at the time, a transgender was somebody who didn't have surgery. A transsexual was somebody who had gone the full regimen of surgery and hormones. So there was a distinction back then that there isn't any longer. So there I was with these issues. I got married, had children, had a great career in the aerospace industry. I worked on the Apollo space missions. I was a national operations manager for a very large automotive company. I had 2 parking places. I was an executive, but I was struggling with that purple dress that my grandmother had put in me with my identity. And I went to a gender clinic, and the individual said, well, you have gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and you need hormones and therapy. And there was no dissenting voices at the time. Dr. Paul Walker happened to be the one who wrote the international standards of care that are actually in use today. He was the chairperson for those standards. So he wasn't some rummy-dum kind of guy that just didn't know what he was talking about. He was actually considered the world leading authority on diagnosing and treating these issues of identity. So within 2 years of going through the hormone therapy, 1983, I underwent the surgery. And then in 1990, I detransitioned after living my life as Laura Jensen, working for the federal government and losing my family, my career, and so forth. But then I started to study psychology, and I continue to study this intently and realized that, first off, amazingly, no one in the history of mankind has ever changed their gender because it's not biologically possible. So when I began to look at that, I go, well, what are they changing? And I remember one of my counselors at Stanford University coined the term persona, that the only thing you really change is your persona, that no one can effectively change their gender or sex. Your persona is just your outward appearance, that your inner morphology, which is how you're constructed, how you're made up, what you are, never changes. So no matter how many hormones you take, how much surgery you have, as I did, I never became a woman, nor does anyone else. I challenged the doctors, actually, when I wanted to change my birth certificate back to Walt, to come to court, the doctors who did the surgery, and tell the court that they actually had changed me from man to woman, and they could not do it. They said that the surgery is not effective and never has been effective in changing anyone's gender. So first off, then I realized we have a whole false narrative going here. Nobody changes their gender. It's not about gender identity disorder. And it's not about gender dysphoria. Well, what is it? Well, there's actually another dysphoria that isn't tied to gender. It's a generalized dysphoria of unhappiness, stress, all these other issues, but it's connected to mental disorders. And those mental disorders usually arise out of issues that happened in your childhood, including cross-dressing or being physically, emotionally, or psychologically abused, sometimes sexually abused. So that set me on my journey to begin to help somebody. And I started my website, sexchangeregret.com, which in the last 7 years, by the way, has received over 2 million hits. And I have over 10,000 emails in my inbox of people asking for help.
But you're in a unique position where you lived through this. So you very likely know exactly what someone is going through. Very few people, I can't profess to know what someone is going through, but you have that unique position. It's very interesting how many of these one-directional forces there were sort of influencing you, the cross-dressing, the celebrity status of someone sort of directing you, the doctors, they're not providing a sort of dissident voice or maybe speak to this other person for an alternative. It was very much a one-track thing, and that's what led to what I imagine would be quite a bit of difficulty for you. That one track thing that you would probably categorize as a problem is now the law of the land in Canada. Everything has to go in that direction. If someone would dare say, well, it's okay to wear a dress for fun, but you know that you're a boy and you don't really wear that or something, that could be deemed illegal technically now. So what do you make of this sort of ideological one-trackness that is now the law of the land in Canada?
Well, the best word I can use for it is really quite insane that we're actually discussing something about changing your gender that is categorically impossible to do. So that's the first problem that I have, is that you and I are entered into a discussion about people changing their gender, and nobody's ever changed their gender. It's never happened. It isn't going to happen. Biologically, it can't happen. Medically, it can't happen. So we're talking about something that is imagined. I call it a folly. It's just really a group of people have set out with this idea that there's, and most of them quite honestly are the homosexual side of this issue, which I refer to as the drag queens, and which we have here, they're flamboyant. And there's quite a bit of difference actually between many of the people who identify as transgender and the drag queens, by the way, because the drag queens are the ones who lead the gay pride parade, and they have long eyelashes. They're very over the top with their appearance. Many of the transgender people are ones who want to blend in and not be noticed at all. Quite different from the drag queen who wants everybody to notice them. Yeah. And so you have some differing ideologies here. And so that's kind of a key point. And I will say 90% of the people that I've worked with, the thousands of people I've worked with, are heterosexual men who are suffering from autogynephilia, transvestic fetish disorders, or cross-dressers that were misdiagnosed with gender dysphoria because they came from a home where they were sexually abused. And if you were sexually abused, the appropriate diagnosis is not gender dysphoria. It's generalized dysphoria, and generalized dysphoria deals with the issues of schizophrenia, bipolar 1 disorder, and PTSD, which are associated with being sexually abused. Now, the gender clinics won't own up to the fact that these individuals that are sexually abused are generalized in their dysphoria and should not be given. Anybody who's been sexually abused should never, ever be given hormone therapy or encouraged toward transitioning, because in my work, 100% of them will detransition or have regret. So it fails the heterosexual men who've been sexually abused. The surgery and hormones will fail them every time.
And if you wouldn't mind sharing, I know that during the early stages of your transitioning process, if I remember correctly, you had found a church community and you had an absolutely sort of horrific experience with a pastor who definitely did not help you in any way, shape, or form, because we want to ensure that this is part of our concern here, is that individuals in those communities, considering whether it be same-sex attraction or generalized dysphoria, that they don't feel like they're being targeted. What we're fighting for here is their capacity to seek whatever counseling they deem best. And what that pastor did to you did not help that trajectory whatsoever.
Well, yeah, I would actually say that the guy who said, "We don't want your kind in our church," that was, keep in mind, that was in the 80s. There was very little, or if any, pastors who had a clue about what to do with this. So to his credit, I would say he was in no position to deal with this issue anyway. So I didn't really fault him for that. I actually kind of laughed at him because I knew that's really pretty much what everybody had throughout the industry at that. Keep in mind, it's 1984. Yeah. So, but I went to another pastor who had a whole different take on it. He said, "I don't know what to do with this, but we'll walk through this together." And he actually became my friend, and he's still my friend today. I mean, he took me to lunch, took me to dinner, took me to his house, and he just wanted to pick my brain and learn where this was coming from. So there's the church made a huge difference in my life. Yeah. They didn't try to pray it away; they tried to understand it and deal with it, because what he said was, if you're going to change back to Walt, the power and grace of Jesus Christ is going to do it, not me. I'm just here to sort of understand what you're going through and be here to support you. But I think what's really interesting, you pointed out something about the conversion therapy. The truth is rather hard for us to take in. The only people engaged in conversion therapy are the gender clinics, not the pastors, not me, not anybody else, because they are the ones that are coercing medical transitioning. They are the ones that are guilty. And I agree, it should be against the law. So if we were to take the law and turn it around and apply it to the people who are really committing the crime, it's the gender clinics. It's not the pastor. It's not me. It's not you. It's not people asking questions. They are forcing people into these hormone therapies and surgical procedures who, by the way, many of them from Canada contact me and say, how do I get out of this mess? Because this is what happened to me. And so when you have 10,000 emails in your inbox, and by the way, no one who I've worked with of the thousands, including myself, have ever been counted. The detransitioners and regretters have never been counted in any research studies as having regret. So the way that they keep the number down and make it look like there's very little regret is they don't count us. I mean, this is the absurdity of this. So the people doing conversion therapy are gender clinics using hormones and surgery. People who do talk therapy don't do any conversion therapy at all. And many of the people who are going through these procedures, by the way, start out as heterosexual and think that they must be homosexual after they go through the procedure. So again, gender clinics are the ones who should be shut down, who are actually destroying these people's lives. It's horrific what they're doing by any stretch of the imagination. No one has ever changed their gender, so that's the first lie. Secondly, hormones and surgery don't affect anything in your biology. It affects a lot in your psychology and emotional state and oftentimes sexual state, and leads to alcoholism, drug addiction, and as we've reported many, many times, 18 times more likely to commit suicide than you are if you didn't go through the procedure. So the gender clinics are the ones that are responsible for the harm being done, not pastors.
One of the other things that I want to talk about, and very much you've lived through this, and so you are extremely passionate about this. You are not doing this out of malice. You're doing it because you love these people. And the narrative that we are fed up here is very much that if you're not in favor of this bill and you're not in favor of everyone just transitioning, no sort of principles in place whatsoever to direct that, no informed consent, you're a villain. They've branded anyone who dares challenge this as a fearmonger, a hateful person. And it's to such an organized extent that within like 20 minutes of our first video on this topic coming up, organizations were already posting replies to it. It's that organized. What do you say to people out there who say that you're a villain for sharing your story?
Yeah, I think it's just as funny as can be, because here's the thing. They either don't understand or they're incapable of understanding that I don't talk to anybody that doesn't write me an email and say, Walt, I want you to help me. I was destroyed by the surgery and by the hormones. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Can you help me? So, the idea that I'm a villain, I'm actually the only one amongst, well, perhaps there's others too, but I'm the only one who's had a website out there for 14 years that reaches out and has people contact me. I help for free, by the way. I've never charged anybody a dime. So there's no financial benefit for me doing this. You don't pay me to get on here. They don't pay me to help them. I don't get financial benefit from this. I do it because I care about the people. I do it because there is far too much harm being done by the use of hormones and surgery on people who do not need it. It's reckless. It's actually Frankenstein-esque kind of stuff. They've turned transgenderism to a cult. They have their own sort of biblical view of what transgenderism is. They believe that you can become the center of the universe if you become a transgender, that you have all power over everybody. And so they get into sports, men do, and challenge women, which is absurd. So, I'm helping people who ask for it. I don't go out and tell people you shouldn't do this or not do that. I answer the emails that people send me. And by the way, very important for these people who don't like me to understand that I have had more people who are living the transgender life write me notes and say, Walt, thank you. I have friends who are suffering deeply from this, and you're one of the few people who will reach out and help them. And we know they're suffering either from alcoholism, drug addiction, because they never should have had the surgery. So I laugh at those people who think I'm some kind of villain. It's absurd.
I, for one, am very grateful that you, who've lived through this yourself and can speak to it with an extent of authority and bluntness that probably no one else can, because you've actually been through it, are there. For folks out there who maybe are contemplating this path, we've shared some stories of people experiencing either same-sex attraction or this generalized dysphoria that you talk about. If there's anyone out there who maybe this resonates a bit with, where can they find you?
Yeah, you go to sexchangeregret.com and you get my email there. You can contact me. But let me encourage you, if you're somebody who's a person ground into faith, then get my book, A Transgender's Faith. It'll show you how you can journey back and redeem and restore your life just like I did. And that's not for everybody, but for the people who want to sort of sift through this on a faith-based basis, then A Transgender's Faith is a book for you. If you're not, you might want to look at Paper Genders and Trans Life Survivors. Both of those books are geared for the general population of people typically not believers in Jesus, but want to have more informed ideas about what goes on. And Paper Genders gives you the history and the people who are involved, the individuals who wrote the standards of care and what their ideology was. And then Trans Life Survivors is just 30 stories of individuals who have regret, and they tell you where the regret came from and show you how this ideology ruined their lives. And keep in mind we talk about people going through these procedures. I'm working with a 26-year-old man today who was diagnosed. This happens all the time. This is not a one-off issue. This is one of the common issues. He was in a gender clinic since 2013. He's been there because he has schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and PTSD. He's a mentally ill individual. In March of last year, they transitioned him. They cut off his genitals. With PTSD, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, they cut his genitals off. Now, and they claimed that he was, transgender. He contacted me in August, and I've been working with him. I've had well over 300 emails from him, phone calls all the time. It's now a medical malpractice case that's going to tear this one institution up for even doing this. Nobody should undergo these procedures who has comorbid disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD, dissociative disorders. So if you're hearing my voice and you know somebody that has a mental disorder, keep them away from these gender clinics, because they are the ones who are doing conversion therapy on people who don't need it. The pastors are trying to prevent people from going through conversion therapy. Isn't that the truth? So you have one group trying to prevent people from conversion therapy, and the gender clinics are participating in conversion therapy that causes people to be suicidal 19 times more than if they didn't go through the procedure. So Paper Genders, Trans Life Survivors, and A Transgender's Faith are just 3 of the 8 books. All the books are quite good because I wrote them.
Well, I'm sure people will be checking those out. Walt, I want to thank you for your unique perspective in this and sharing a little bit about your story for those maybe out there who weren't familiar with you. Thank you so much for joining me, and for everyone out there, I want to thank you for tuning in for Rebel News. I'm Adam.
Thank you.
You agree that Canadians should, regardless of their backgrounds, be able to seek whichever counseling they deem best for themselves. Go to banbillc4.com now, sign our petition, and click our one-click politics link to send a message to those responsible for this troubling law.